You are listening to the Danger Tapes podcast with your host, Devin Ramos.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Danger Tapes podcast. My name is Devin Ramos. Today, I'm joined by my baby brother, Darrick, who has been MIA from the Victorville scene for a very long time. What's up, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. We've been hanging out all day and pretty much a little bit of yesterday, too. Right now, we're just kind of on a little break from kind of this whole, I guess, kind of a marathon for today. We were at a birthday party for a friend of Sway earlier. And right now, we're just kind of waiting on our good pal Ryan to go to the bar. And just kind of made a pit stop at home first just to do this podcast. And it'll probably just be a little quick episode. If you remember from last time he was here, we pretty much just talked about movies and shit we've been watching and paid attention to. Anything new that you've watched in the last time that you were here, Darrick?
Well, I've seen Inside Out. Well, maybe I should go back before I talk about before I talk about what I did, or rather what I watched. I should talk about where I've been. I was finishing up my last semester in school, and I've been super busy between basically like between being worried about not finding work and then just like lounging around, not even really watching much stuff when I was on my little break. And then I got a job working as an assistant editor for a small production company, and now I've seen a couple movies here and there, but mostly what I spend most of my time watching is short trailers that I'm recutting for the program that the production company I work for works on, or rather produces, I should say, or has part in producing. And so lots of movie trailers. And what else? I did my final research paper. The last research paper I turned in from my last research paper in college was, well, the last two was, one was on the Big Lebowski, which was weird because that was the first paper I ever wrote. The first paper I ever wrote in college was on the Big Lebowski, but the last paper was on Lehane, which was the first time I ever seen Lehane, which was pretty crazy. Other than that, I've seen movies. I saw like Inside Out, and I saw Ant-Man, and the Avengers, and some other shit. But but those are movies that mostly everyone has seen. But we kind of want to do this podcast for a while, probably about a month, which was when I got hired at my current job, and talk about Lehane, I guess, because that was probably the last movie that that we both seen and kind of like wanted to touch on for a bit.
Actually, before, I know you could actually talk about this a lot, before we get into Lehane, because I actually did end up watching that based on your recommendation, but to kind of keep this a little bit more contemporary, Roddy Piper just died, and I know you're a big fan of the movie They Live, and I know a lot of people haven't seen They Live. Like, what can you tell people about They Live?
Well, yeah, a lot of people, it's crazy because one of my coworkers, as well as the coworker two of, I guess, one of my coworkers and then another guy who works with us, occasionally, they're both really big movie buffs, too, and they like watching movies. And before I came along, they had an established friendship already. So I hadn't really talked with one of my main coworkers much, and yesterday, like you said, Roddy Piper died. And with that being said, I went up to him and I asked him if he had ever seen, or if he knew who Roddy Piper was, and he told me no. And then I asked him if he's ever seen They Live, and he also said no. And I think it's a really cool movie. It's actually a movie that I recently kind of wanted to to add to my my small little collection I have down at my apartment, because it's I mean, it's a pretty bizarre movie for those people who haven't seen it, because the concept, when I explained it to my coworker, he sounded like amazed. But it's pretty much, people who haven't seen that movie, I feel like they've heard about that movie, or at least have seen some sort of reference to that movie, whether it be in the form of the Obey poster that Shepard Fairey kind of like stole the font from, or like inspiration for They Live. There was I can't think of it right now off the top of my head, but there was like something that was very similar to They Live recently in popular culture. But They Live is basically a movie where Rowdy Roddy Piper finds a pair of sunglasses in Los Angeles. He's like this what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? I guess he's kind of like this nomadic construction worker who just goes from job to job, and one day the police raid this house where there's these kind of like rallies and whatever, and he finds these sunglasses in the trash can, puts them on, and they allow him to kind of just see who's an alien and who's not. And basically everything, like billboards that have advertisements for Hawaii or a certain product, he sees the brainwash behind them. And you know, probably the most infamous scene from that movie is when he goes into a bank and he starts shooting everyone who looks like an alien while he's wearing the sunglasses. And yeah, that movie's pretty cool, and like I've seen it twice. But if you haven't seen it, then you should definitely check it out. And it's a movie directed by John Carpenter, which is, I think, surprises a lot of people, because most people know him for I think John Carpenter did Halloween. It's weird because I know John Carpenter for They Live, but he also did Assault on Precinct 13 and a couple other horror movies. He's like one of the biggest American horror icons. And yeah, They Live is more of a sci-fi film, but it's really cool. And if you haven't seen it and you like cool 80s movies, then you should probably watch They Live.
Yeah, that's one that I haven't seen, like, based on your recommendations. But like we were saying before with like Lehane, it was funny because me and you had actually just watched Juice for the first time like a couple months ago, and I was like really, really moved by it, in the sense that like the way I sort of came up, not that I came up anything like the way They Live in Juice, but the way I was sort of brought up around like the media that was focused on in Juice, whether that be the music or the TV or like, you know, a lot of the way, like that urban lifestyle, something that I kind of wanted to emulate out here in like, you know, rural ass Victorville. I was really moved by that movie, and I think like the acting was really good, and you know, it was just a really good film that was sort of really iconic to a lot of American viewers that really loved hip hop, that old school 90s boom bap hip hop, the DJ lifestyle, and with Tupac like really, really playing not only a big role, but playing it really well in that movie. I think a lot of people were really moved by it. But then you turned me on to Lehane, which a lot of people haven't seen, at least in our day and age. And I'm sure, you know, maybe when foreign films, that film had originally come out, maybe it had a bigger audience, as I'm sure, like with it being on the Criterion Collection, I'm sure a lot of people had actually viewed it. I think it was on Netflix for a while. When I watched it, it is one of those foreign films that actually goes hand in hand with Juice. And it's very different. It's as different as it is to being the same as Juice. Like, it's sort of a paradox in that way, because they really do go hand in hand, and there's a lot of really big differences, and it's really the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to describe it is kind of like talking about like using Juice or Do the Right Thing or Boys in the Hood as an example, in which Lehane kind of basically like under American, like I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like, I think one of the most, like along with like westerns and like a couple other genres, but like westerns, but like more so in the towards the end of the 20th century, like in the late 80s, early 90s, America had created what was known as like the hood film with Boys in the Hood and Do the Right Thing, and Lehane, at least in my opinion, before City of God, and City of God being one of the biggest international hood films, Lehane, after I watched it, was kind of like to me, probably what was probably one of the first one of the first foreign, hood movies, at least under that genre. And what's weird is I had seen that movie at a couple months ago when we went to not Criterion, Amoeba a couple months ago, and I was looking through the Criterion Collection. I saw that, and it kind of sparked my interest to cover, but it was like $30 there at Amoeba, brand new, I think used, and it was $25 new on Amazon. So I bought it because I came across that same title, because my professor recommended that we write about it and write about the themes that we discovered for during our European cinema course. And I was like, well, that's weird. I saw it there, and then I kind of looked at some images on Google and saw basically what the film was about. And at that point I was kind of like, yeah, I have to watch this movie. But you're very right in the same sense that Lehane is very parallel to the American hood films like Juice and Boys in the Hood, and it kind of touches on not Boys in the Hood, but Do the Right Thing. And Lehane and it is very much like, in my personal opinion, Do the Right Thing and Juice kind of put together. At least Juice in the sense that it's stylistic, and Do the Right Thing in the sense that it's dealing with themes like police brutality on minorities. And I mean, the crazy thing about Lehane, which I think goes a bit further than Do the Right Thing, is and Boys in the Hood and everything like that. Boys in the Hood, when you watch those movies, they feel very dated. But Lehane, being that it was released 20 years ago in 1995, when I first watched it, it felt very relevant to I mean, what's really going on today in terms of like police brutality against black people and mainly black males. And this was right around the time that the whole like Freddie Gray thing happened in Baltimore. And it just, watching that movie during that time period, it feels a lot more relevant, even though it takes place in the 1990s. And I mean, it's really a great film that I've seen it once already, and I kind of rewatch it again while writing my paper. And I'm really glad I picked it up. But yeah, it's definitely one of those foreign films that, like you said, it holds up to where it feels like very, I guess, it executes American themes very well, but also it does it it's really cool in how they establish that it feels very American, but at the same time it's to my opinion, it's refreshing because of how kind of foreign it is as well. It's very like set the ground for City of God as well, and not a lot of people really know that. And it's I mean, I feel like there's definitely a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the big things that I got from it, aside from it being like Juice, which, like I said, I did really like. But one thing that I did really like about Lehane was, like you said, it was very relevant to what's happening today with police brutality. But what I found interesting was, seeing as how it was made 20 years ago, there's a big difference in the way the characters are portrayed in being against the police. Because if you recall, it was the white protagonist that was against the police. I'm terrible with character names, but it was Vince. Like, it was the white it was Vince that was really, who was white in the film, who was against the police. And the black guy, what was his name?
Hubert.
Yeah, Hubert, that was a little bit more mellow and reserved in terms of like sort of going against them, and he really wanted to keep Vince in control. against the police. And there was a lot of other white characters, and there was a few, the Arabian one as well, who were against the police in that movie. And it's sort of interesting to see, everybody saying, like, every time there's a problem with the police out here, the media is trying to make it a black and white thing. And in reality, it's really a thing against the people. And this is sort of a film that sort of proves that the media is trying to make, at least the news anyways, the media is trying to make it a black and white issue when it really is a police against the people issue.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from the film, as far as it being, and being really contemporary, and being sort of maybe even ahead of its time in the ideas that it was portraying. Because, yeah, it really is not, I mean, at the end of the day, it appears to be a black and white thing, but if you go into other countries where, at least even in France, where black culture is a little bit more, not so much respected, but at least sort of thought of as a higher level than what it is in America, I think that we can actually see past sort of the race issue of it, because it was really a sort of it felt more of a melting pot than even Juice portrayed, because Juice was, like you said, it was a hood movie. It had a predominantly black character base.
Yeah. Well, one thing I kind of like, the thing with Vince is, like, he's white in the film, but he's also Jewish. So that's like another thing that was kind of established in other films we watch in my European cinema course, was like there was another film called No Man's Land, and it was about the war between, I think it was Lithuania and Bosnia, I believe, and or maybe Yugoslavia. I forget the two war. I forget the war, but it was like basically a war between these two people, or these two countries rather, and both characters are white. And you make a valid point in saying that it's more of a thing of against the people, and like you said, the thing that I kind of touched upon in my paper, which I felt was really relevant, was if you kind of look at how the characters rather are what they kind of like, who inspires these characters in Lehane, which, like, for instance, Vince in the beginning of Lehane, he's kind of like doing this whole kind of like taxi driver inspired impression of Robert De Niro's character in Taxi Driver, and he's like very hostile, and like the music he listens to is very aggressive, and like just how he portrays himself is this very aggressive person. But if you look at Hubert, who's kind of like, he's this boxer, he kind of seems like he has his like the way he copes with stress a lot. He doesn't want to deal drugs in the film, but he does it because he needs to help out his mother. As opposed to someone who, like Vince, he has those influences as well. He has his grandmother and his mother, but he chooses kind of just like disband with them. And what's kind of crazy in both of these characters have American influences, but if you really pay close attention to, like, and this is something we're talking about with on the way up here, about production design. If you pay really close attention to Hubert's room, he has, well, one, he's listening to a Marvin Gaye song when he's in his room smoking, and he's also listening, which is like this really, it's not like upbeat hip hop that's very aggressive. It's Marvin Gaye, and it's like kind of like slow and very calming. And he has posters. I think he has a poster of Muhammad Ali, and who really, dealt with a lot of adversity. And he also has posters of the two black athletes during the '68 Olympics that kind of gained fame and notoriety for holding up the Black Power fist during the medal ceremony, which I kind of thought was interesting, and kind of like how you said, it's not really a black and white thing, but a thing against the people, and I feel like those two, their two kind of backgrounds and how they kind of like basically what inspires them is really also important in kind of establishing how it isn't just a black and white thing, because in I think in American film those roles would be reversed. Like Hugh Bear would be portrayed more as this black character who listens to aggressive hip hop. You know, he's very aggressive in terms of he's inspired by violent films, but it's rather instead it's Vince in the film, who many people would see as just this white character, and you know, I guess in American film, Vince would be more of this kind of like mellow, calmed guy, but it's not really about that. It's just over there, it's about the people, because all these people live in these kind of like ghetto communities over there, and they can't really relate to their own cultures either. Even like when they go up to the roof, they tell the Arabian kid that or the Middle Eastern kid that he can't be with them because like he can't even eat their hot dogs or whatever, which is like that Arabian culture, and like they kind of feel, I think it's like this kind of like gap that these characters are placed into. Like they don't really relate to their background roots, whether they're Jewish, Middle Eastern, or African, and they don't really but they kind of see this American culture, which they can kind of like grasp onto, which is a couple other films we saw in my European cinema course was kind of like that too. Like it's the American dream that they can't really get to, but and those values that are holding them back are kind of like what they want to like just be rid of, which is kind of ironic in the sense because it is a melting pot still, just like here in America.
Right. I mean, it was a whole city life too. I mean, much like say New York or even LA. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those films that I feel it's not. I mean, like a lot with the Criterion Collection, like there's a lot of really artsy films that the average viewer, not to insult like people that just watch movies just for fun, but basically those people that do watch movies just for fun like wouldn't be able to grasp. The Criterion Collection has like a lot of those films. This film, Lehane, which like I said, it was on Netflix for a while. Like you could find it in various places. I think even like in parts you could find it on YouTube. But it's not one of those films that's out of grasp from people. Like you said, it's very comparable to Juice. It's very comparable to Do the Right Thing. And it is in black and white, but I think, like you said, like you were touching on the American values that were in that film, it's very heavily influenced by American culture too.
Yeah.
And I think that American viewers, though it is a foreign film in a completely different language and subtitled, I think if you really sat down and watched the film, it has a good pace to it. It has a good feel to it. It's aesthetically pleasing, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy it. And I think they should really try to watch Lehane. When they're really trying to watch something from the past, because I think now with our culture like being driven towards instant Netflix and Hulu and everything, like there is a bit of a need to watch something a little bit more modern than going back and watching like older shows or because on Amazon Prime you could go back and watch like hundreds of classic films for free. And, on Netflix, they have classic films too, but a lot of people sort of drive themselves to watching something like The Interview or something more modern. Like if you go back and watch something like, I just got done watching Twin Peaks not too long ago. If you go back, you could like really get this old sense of the way they made television shows and the way they made film. And I think a lot of people would really enjoy Lehane for it being, a movie that is 20 years old at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's 20 years old, but at the same time, it's also important to that people know that it's really relevant. And I think it's more relevant than not to take away from what Do the Right Thing did and Boys in the Hood, because without those films, there would be no Lehane. But it's really, I personally feel it's really more relevant than those films today, because it's kind of like right in that middle gap of like, it's 1995, I guess, heading towards the 21st century. But I mean, today these kind of, these kind of themes that really deal with the police, the people versus the police, and the whole, I guess the authority, the authorities basically abusing their power, felt really relevant. to watching, and it's, you know, I definitely can't relate to the film, but I can definitely I definitely feel like a lot of the stuff happening today is comparable to that stuff that happened in Lehane. And like you even said, one of the even the better things about Lehane is that the fact that it's so aesthetically pleasing, like City of God, you know, because City of God is very aesthetically pleasing too in terms of its cinematography, and the what kind of Lehane is kind of very certain stuff is shot documentary style, but the framing is really amazing too in terms of the cinematography and how they really compose these shots. It's kind of like watching like still photography, in my personal opinion, and the way they set up the way they kind of block these three characters within the frame, and they use these really kind of like medium wide shots are really, really awesome. And if you're a fan of film and you haven't seen Lehane, then you should definitely check out Lehane. And there's sure, I'm sure there's much more to talk about, and you know, I've only seen the film 1.5 times, and it's definitely a film worth owning if you really want to take a chance and go ahead and just plunge into buying the Criterion DVD. I personally think it's worth owning. It's a film that when you watch it, you know, it's like you said, it's paced very well. The story is great. The cinematography is great. Yeah, it's definitely a film that should be talked about more today, and especially in for film buffs, if you really enjoy watching Criterion or classic films and getting a sense of how they kind of made films like that, especially towards in an era where they were heading towards digital filmmaking.
Right. Well, that's all I had for this podcast at this point. Do you have anything else to say before you leave for the next few months before you're on this podcast again?
Nah, that's pretty much it. Probably I'll come back and we'll be able to talk about some more stuff. I definitely want to check out some more Criterion stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I don't have much else to talk about.
All right. Yeah, that's all I had too. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Right now I'm going to go get drunk at the Tilted Kilt. I think like at this point I'm uploading these podcasts to YouTube, and if you guys could help us out and subscribe to YouTube, our SoundCloud page, our iTunes, there's 1,000 different ways to listen to this podcast. Probably not 1,000, but there's a lot of different ways to listen to this podcast. They're all free, and it meets the world to the whole network. So please subscribe, and hope you guys enjoyed it. Like Darrick said, he'll be back in a few months. We'll probably talk about another rare gem for you guys based off the Criterion Collection or other films that we find really cool and that people should watch. So thank you guys for listening. Catch you guys next week. Peace.
Bye.